and welcome everyone. Please feel free, if you'd like to don't change your name, but just add where you're joining us from. It's always great to see, folks from all over. How since the pandemic began, which is nearly 2 years now, 2 years and a bit over a month, we've obviously expanded, and people are joining us, able to join us from all over, basically all over the world, but typically from the US and Canada. So just a very warm welcome to everyone. Please let us know in the chat if you're new, joining us for the first time. Always like to give a particularly warm welcome to new folks, as well as to everyone, people, regulars. And so I'm Hugh Byrne. This is offered by the Insight Meditation Community of Washington, IMCW, and part of IMCW is the Center for Mindful Living, which until very recently was a physical space in Tenleytown, Northwest DC, but now, just after 2 years of of not being able to really be in that space and do everything online, we've now moved to online, but with the aspiration of, when the conditions appropriate are right, to go back in person again, go back in person, and possibly, if conditions are auspicious, to have a permanent space for us, but we have to get out of the pandemic we're in and the period we're in to do that. So welcome on behalf of IMCW and the Center for Mindful Living. And if you're new to me, I've been teaching with IMCW for about 17, 18 years. I've been teaching since 2000 and practicing for about 30 years, and teach here with IMCW and around the US and somewhat internationally, in Ireland next summer and this coming summer, and now more and more online as well. So welcome to everyone, and welcome particularly to this class on the day weekend day and time we're celebrating the great leader, Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., remembering his life and his sacrifice and all that he brought to, all that he gave to make this country a more free and a more equal and a more compassionate country, society, and all that he brought to the world. I'm going to bring Dr. King back in, maybe at different times, maybe just some of his what he shared, but just kind of holding him and all he gave in our hearts, inviting that today as we begin our session together. And for those who are new, the format of the class is fairly simple. We now begin with a meditation, and then I'll give a short talk or reflection. Sometimes they're not as short as I intend them to be, but somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes. And then we'll have Emily leads us in some lovely mindful movement, and then we'll have some time to share, either in the full group or in small groups, often dependent on time. And then we'll finish up with a meditation. And there's always possibility and the willingness to tweak the, we'll keep the main kind of themes, but tweak how we do it. And so, and you're very, very welcome to give feedback if you know, we used to do the talk first, but then it seemed to work better for people to have the meditation and kind of more fully arrive first, and then kind of being maybe open for in a different way for the talk. So, but feel free to share if you know, if something works better for you, to give us feedback on that. So we'll begin with meditation and the talk. And the talk today is going to be broadly on being present. But I'm also wanting to bring in, I was sharing some reflections last week, and somebody pointed out that these, you know, these sayings, these sayings in the Tibetan tradition called Lojong. Lojong is a form of training in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And I've been reflecting myself in my own practice, and some of these sayings, you know, I'll say a little bit more about them later, but kind of aphorisms come spontaneously and feel like they really help me in my practice. And I want to share some of these with you. So I may give more of a focus to the sayings, these sayings, and relate them very much to the talk of, you know, the theme of the talk, which is being present, and what we mean by being present, and the challenges, the difficulties, why it's difficult to be present. Quite often it's difficult to be present, and how valuable it is to be here, to be present with our experience, and some of the practices that support that. And then that gets into these kind of quasi Lojong practices, these sayings. One of them is a kind of version of what I speak about quite frequently, is about the kind of the way we hold our experience, and that's the theme is allow everything, allow everything. You know, and so I'll come back and talk about that. But let's, with that as a short introduction, let's sit together. So if you like, take a few moments to find your posture. Relax and settle. You can think of this as taking your seat. You know, think of the Buddha under the Bodhi tree, you know, a posture that's dignified, erect, open, receptive. So sitting in a way where your back is straight, shoulders relaxed. You can let your hands rest in your lap or on your knees. If you're comfortable, you can close your eyes, let your attention come inward. Let your attention drop down out of the thinking mode. You'll still be able to take in everything that's said, but without actively kind of planning the future or ruminating on the past. But just letting yourself be here, letting your attention drop down into the feelings in the body. Just feel your body. Pressing down, the weight of your body pressing on your buttocks, your thighs, your feet touching the floor, your hands in your lap or on your knees. You could do a brief scan of your body, beginning at your head and moving down. Just see if there's any area where you might relax the body a little more. The facial muscles and the forehead and the eyes, the mouth, and the shoulders and the back of the neck. Inviting a relaxing of the body. The belly and the chest, the torso. Just notice how that area feels. We often tighten up if we're tense or stressed, and just inviting that area to relax, soften. Coming down to the lower body. Inviting just a sense of ease to the body as a whole. You might bring your awareness to your breathing. Just notice how it is right now. The breath can be a very helpful barometer of our overall state of being. If we're stressed, we tend to breathe more shallowly. And when we're more relaxed, we tend to breathe more deeply. It can be helpful to invite a few longer, deeper breaths to help you arrive and settle. Nice deep in-breath and relaxing, releasing on the out-breath. Breathing in, calming the body. And breathing out, calming the mind. You might just check in with what most helps you to arrive and settle when you begin meditating. Some practices that can be helpful are to invite a smile. And just to notice the effect that the smile has on the body and the brain and the nervous system. Typically, it kind of allows us to open a little bit more, relaxes the body and the mind and the heart. So consciously inviting a smile, maybe thinking about somebody or something that tends to make you feel happy or peaceful can be helpful. And just to take in whatever comes up. If there's a feeling of warmth or pleasantness, just let yourself connect with that, feel it. Putting your hand on your heart, maybe the other one on the belly, can also be a way of settling the body and the mind. It's connecting with yourself, with this life, caring for yourself. Just taking some moments to reflect on gratitude can also be very helpful, particularly to help us step out of our focus on, what's wrong or what we're lacking. Just to remember and be grateful for, appreciate what we have. Excuse me. People, conditions, situations in your life. You might reflect on these practices, how they support you in your life, if they do, assuming they do for most of us. And just to take that in, appreciate. You might allow yourself to open to whatever is present for you right now. Whatever you're noticing, see if you can just make room for what's here, make space for what's here. You might scan the body, just notice what's calling for attention, if anything. Welcoming the guests. Whatever's present, can you make space for this? Can you say yes to this? Letting it come, letting it stay as long as it wants to stay, and then letting it pass. So not getting in a struggle or a fight with what you're experiencing. Not spacing out, but just opening, allowing. This moment without judgment. And if the feeling comes up to push something away or to hold on to something, just notice that too. Just hold that too with kindness, with care. You bring your awareness to your emotions and mind states right now, whatever might be present. Maybe there's some tiredness or restlessness. Maybe there's some peace. Maybe there's some sadness. Whatever is here, can you make space for it? Just allow it to be here. Just letting whatever feelings are present in the body, in the heart, in the mind, to come and go in their own time. And what happens when you don't do what perhaps you typically do and we typically do is like, I like this, but I don't like this. We push and we pull. Rather than pushing and pulling, just this allowing, recognizing and allowing what's here. A compassionate awareness of whatever, of everything. Can you can you allow everything? Everything that's arising. Come and go in its own time. See what happens when you don't push and pull. Or if you do push or pull, that you meet that too with kindness, with acceptance. Make space for that too. So nothing that you're experiencing, nothing that you are aware of is outside of the field of compassionate awareness, of kind attention. And you might find it helpful to just let your attention rest on your breathing, just as a way of gathering the attention, particularly if the mind is very busy, very active. Having a home base can really support us being present. There can be a light attention on the sensations of breathing, breathing in and breathing out. And when the mind goes off into thoughts, into stories, plans, memories, just have that point of reference to come back to, that home base of your breathing, of the body. You can begin again in any moment. To finish off the meditation with just a reading from Dr. King, and maybe just beginning with a reflection, an invitation to reflection of how these teachings and practices are very much about awakening our own hearts and finding freedom from suffering. They're also inexorably and fully connected with all of our life, you know, and living together in society and living together in the world, and how we do that, you know, our relationships are, and our living together is, you know, a huge part of our life. I mean, we couldn't live without other people, we know that. And so just particularly today and this weekend, this period of remembering Dr. King, I want to share some of his words from the his 1963 March on Washington speech. But I want to focus on, you know, what's very familiar is the second half of his, you know, I have a dream, you know, it's called I have a dream speech. But I want to focus more on the initial part, you know, just reflecting on where we are today and how we can engage and how these teachings and practices can be brought actively into engaging with the suffering in the world and the suffering of our society around us. And I'll just share some of what Dr. King shared, of beginning really with, you know, with the problems before going on to the dream, you know, and he's on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and just recognizing that the language is the language of 1963, and particularly using the word Negro and kind of the male-centered language, just kind of noting that, recognizing that it was almost 60 years ago. He says, 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. So we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's, our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was the promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the new Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity in this nation. And we have come to cash this check, a check that will give us, upon demand, the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We've also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. He goes on to talk about that now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. And he says there are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? He says we can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating, for whites only. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and the Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we're not satisfied, and we'll not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. And then he says, continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi, go back to Alabama, go back to South Carolina, go back to Georgia, go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and the ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. And then he goes on to, I still have a dream, and all of was familiar to many of us. That glorious statement of potential and possibility, and just reflecting on Dr. King's speech and his words in other areas too. It's helpful, I think, and important to reflect on what has changed in the last 58 years, and what still hasn't changed. And many of the same issues we're dealing with today: access to the ballot, and the invitation not to engage in back and forth of political views, but from a standpoint of the Dharma, of these teachings and practices, how these teachings, how these practices might, in a very active way, be more fully brought into how we live together, how we work together, how we work for change, how we work for justice, for a more equal and peaceful society and world, how we engage with climate change. One of the existential challenges of our time. So I share those some of the Dr. King's words really as an invitation to us to really just connect our practice and these teachings with the suffering of the world, with the larger world around us, and how each one of us might find what is wise action for me, what is wise speech, in our time, in these times. So I invite you just to hold whatever is present for you right now in the body and heart and mind. So with kindness, with care. Take your time coming back, opening your eyes, coming back into your space and into this space together. I wonder what if anything came up for you, just reflecting on the words of Dr. King. At this time when we remember his life and all that he brought, and all that he gave. Maybe feel free, if you'd like to share anything in the chat, we can do that. think what I'd like to do, I have to be conscious of time here, so I think what I'd like to do is just to share some reflections on on being present as a kind of very, very much at the heart of our practice of being here now, being present for, as we did in the meditation, just kind of invite that opening to all that's present, which is so much not the way we tend to live our lives, you know, that we're, how much of our lives do we spend really connected with our bodies, with our present moment experience? And how much of our lives are we kind of caught up in, you know, what do I have to do next? And what do I need to take care of? And what about that situation with so-and-so, you know, that I feel, you know, angry about? Or what about all these things happening in politics right now? Where's the world going to? You know, there's a way in which all of those are very helpful and, you know, useful things to reflect on. But if we're being pulled along by those worries and plans and, you know, strong emotions that we get, kind of carried away with, then we're just not present for ourselves and our lives, you know. And I think certainly I see for myself how easily and how often I can get just swept up in whatever it is. You know, it might be for a whole long period, I'm just kind of leaning into the future. You know, I feel myself, you know, I mean, I'm not necessarily aware of it, but I'm feeling, you know, I've got to do this, I've got to take care of this. You know, that's often a very strong energy. But and other times it can be, you know, for all of us, it could be different. But some of us, it could be like, I'm needing something that I'm lacking right now. I'm wanting this. And so my energy, my focus is not on, okay, I'm noticing this. It's actually, I'm being pulled along by, you know, by the thing I'm craving or I'm wanting or I'm needing. You know, that's a way in which we're not present for our experience. At that time, we're not really here. We're kind of, it's that thing that we want, or that person that we want, or that situation that we want, that is actually, that is pulling us along, you know, is dragging us along. You know, in a similar way, if there's something we don't like, you know, we get caught up in what we don't like. You know, it's like that political figure or that person in my family or that person at work I'm having difficulties with. We're kind of like, we're in that place of, oh, they're doing this, I hate them, they're mean, whatever it is. We're actually being pulled along by that story in our mind, and we're not actually present for our experience. We could still have those thoughts, but oh, I'm noticing I'm really caught up in anger. I'm really caught up in wanting. But we're not, most of the time, we don't have the presence of mind to be aware, because the awareness is the key. If I can notice that I'm angry, then it changes the anger. You know, I'm not in road rage, or I'm not caught up in, you know, like, you know, I'm not being pulled along by it. You know, so for me, this kind of this distinction between being aware of and being pulled along by something or being swept up in is all the difference in the world. You know, it's the difference between freedom and suffering. Because if I'm aware, then that's already, there's a pathway to freedom. Even if what I'm caught up in before has been really, really a lot of turmoil, if I can be aware of that, I'm no longer in the turmoil. I'm no longer in the kind of whirlwind or the vortex of that energy. They're doing this, or I need this, or I'm worried about this. That's another way we get kind of like caught up in the maelstrom, as it were, in the turmoil we got. oh, what's going to happen? This will happen, and then that'll happen, and then the other thing, and then and then we're not aware of the way, either the fact that we're caught up or the way that we're caught up, but the energy of that, in this case, the fear or the stress or the worry, is carrying us along in the same way as the craving, in the same way as the pushing away, the aversion. All of these are ways in which we are often not present for ourselves, and they're very, very much tied to suffering. When we're caught up in that way, we tend to be locked in suffering, entangled in suffering. So we're not aware of the experience, and the way out is always awareness, compassionate awareness, or whatever language we might use to speak about that. The way out is through awareness. If we can be aware, then we're no longer swept up in the worry, in the craving, in the aversion, or even in the spacing out. That's another way we check out from our experience. We feel anxious about something, and then all of a sudden we're on the internet. We're going from site to site. We don't know why, but we're kind of, oh, that's interesting. Oh, what about that? What about that? And maybe 10 minutes later or 3 hours later, we might, oh God, what happened? Oh, where have I been all this time? So that's another way we disconnect from ourselves. We're not present for ourselves. So being present is really at the heart of our practice. But it's also difficult to do, because we have all these ways that we get pulled away, And when I say that, I'm making an observation. It's not a judgment or a blame on myself or you or any of us. It's basically, it's conditions, and some of the conditions that help us get swept up in things rather than aware of things. These brains we've inherited from evolution, that are very good at certain things, very good at getting us out of trouble. They tend to be very good at helping us survive. Everyone here, congratulations, you've all survived, however many years of your life, and me too. We're good at that, or if we're not good at that, where we're probably, had a lot of difficult things happen to us, and maybe some of us, some who would be here aren't here. We're good at survival, and we're good at, the brain that we've inherited from evolution that helped us survive is very good for a lot of things, but it also gets us in trouble, where we get hooked into habits, habitual behaviors that get linked to that survival brain, that brain that helped us survive. With our habits, that's the part of the brain that gets activated for our habits. So once something's a bit habitual, we're actually caught up. We're being governed by that reptilian brain. Essentially, that's what's happening. The reptile is in command of the ship. And we've got this more recent brain, and this obviously is very much simplified, oversimplified, but still, the essential truth is we've got this very, very, a very different part of our brain, the more recently developed prefrontal cortex, which helps us to kind of be more deliberate, more intentional, more conscious in what we need to do, that can bring in the big picture. Awareness is very much linked to this, to the prefrontal cortex, to be aware of our experience. So really, we're wanting the prefrontal cortex, we're wanting the awareness to modulate, or to notice when the reptile is getting us into trouble. When when the reptile is telling us, yes, it would be very good to take that drug or that alcohol that we don't want to be taking, to tell us, yeah, it's a good idea because it's habitual. We get sucked in, we get pulled into doing that. So there's lots of good reasons in evolution, in the habits that are very much linked to evolution, that pull us into not being present and make it very, very understandable that we're not present. And add to that, living in this advanced capitalist society, which is really focused on profit and on consumption, and by grabbing hold of your eyeballs, to be able to, like, look at this so you will buy this, look at this so that you will pay for my service, on the internet or whatever. So all of this competition is saying, bright lights, noises, everything, pay attention to me, so there's all of this going on that helps kind of pull us into this not being present for our experience, the opposite of Martha Postlethwaite of creating a clearing in the dense forest of our lives. This is the dense forest. It's like, look at me, buy me, have me, but don't look away, because then you'll look at something else and, I won't be able to get your subscription or your money or whatever. So all of this helps kind of keep us sucked into this not being present. There's this amazing statistics around, you've probably heard, that I think one is that I've heard is the information in one day's issue of the New York Times is equivalent of all of the information of somebody living 70 years, some few centuries ago. It's just basic, the amount of information. The amount of information in your smartphone is, the equivalent to what all of the computers that took us to the moon 60, however many years that was, 50 some years ago. All of this, and we have brains today that were developed in a much simpler time, where we might meet 150 people, I think that's the number, more or less, in a lifetime. We might never travel more than 10 miles from our village, in our lifetime, 400 years ago or 500 years ago, or whatever. And the brain we developed was much more than that. There was hundreds of thousands of years ago and 1 million years ago. So all of this competes, to make it, or not competes, but all of this works together, as it were, to make it difficult to be present, to make it much easier to not be present, to multitask, to use these very finely honed brains in ways that it wasn't being built to be used for, to multitask, to do 6 things at the same time. But we can't in fact do that. It actually doesn't work to do that. We can have some facility to kind of pay attention for a while and then move our attention, but that takes a lot of energy. So all of these are ways we're not present for our, make it difficult to be present for ourselves. And what's really important is that when we're not present for ourselves, we tend to suffer. When we are caught up in wanting, aversion, escaping, worry, fear, all of these, when we're swept up in those states, then we pay a very high price for it. We pay a price in suffering. We get hooked into suffering. And life becomes much less happy, much less joyful, much less fulfilled, and ultimately much less free, because we're being pulled along by conditions rather than being, in control. And I don't mean that in a controlling way, but just in a more directing where our life goes. Probably many of you have heard me share the little story about the person galloping along on a horse at top speed, and somebody shouts out to the rider, "Where are you going?" And the rider shouts back, "Don't ask me, ask the horse." And I love that, because for me, it really encapsulates the way in which the horse is often, very, very often in control. Our habits, our energies, our worries are often in control, rather than our more conscious mind choosing, okay, can I be aware of this energy? Can I be aware of this emotion, rather than being swept up in it? So being present is crucial for our lives. Being present is the doorway to freedom. The Buddha, in his central teaching on mindfulness, the Satipatthana Sutta, what's sometimes called the Four Foundations, in English, Four Foundations of Mindfulness, gives different practices that allow us to be present, being present, aware of the body, being aware of our breathing, aware of our body in movement, different practices for the body, different practices of being aware of emotions and mind states, different practices of awareness that help us to wake up. And he called being present, mindfulness, the direct path to liberation, the direct path to liberation. And so being present is crucial to waking up. It's what allows us to see impermanence. It allows us to not get so caught up in things because everything's changing, not to hold on to anything because nothing can be held on to. Nothing can ultimately be clung to. If you think of your own life, is there anything that really you can cling to? Yes, you can enjoy things, you can enjoy your relationships, your loved ones, but we know in the end, everything is going to end. And so that can help us cultivate wisdom and compassion. It could also, if we get scared about it, we think, oh my God, what's going to happen if I don't have this person, if I don't have that person? But again, awareness is the key. We suffer when we get caught up in things, we get swept up, and we find freedom when we bring awareness to our experience. So being present is essential on the path to freedom from suffering. It's essential for cultivating freedom, cultivating developing insight and finding freedom from suffering. So being present. And what I want to, in this last few minutes, I want to just focus on, I mentioned at the beginning, of our session today, these Tibetan practices called Lojong. And they're called, they're forms of, they're ways of training the mind. They're just particular teachings about to train the mind. They're somewhat different than the teachings in the Theravadan tradition, but they're just different skillful means. They lead to exactly the same place, which is waking up. And I haven't formally practiced in these Lojong in this Lojong Tibetan tradition. But the more I explore these Lojong teachings, the more I feel drawn towards them. And the more I see these teachings in other areas of teachings, and in my own practice and in my own experience. And so I'll just give you some of the traditional, just a little bit of history. They come from about 900 or 1,000 years ago. A Tibetan teacher, or Tibetan, he died in Tibet, Atisha, kind of developed and laid out these teachings, and their teachings basically teachings of awakening. And they have kind of more absolute teachings, treat everything you perceive as a dream, or find the consciousness you had before you were born. That is kind of a Zen koan as well. It's like, a more what's the word I'm looking for? The more puzzling, more paradoxical kind of teachings. But many of them are very, very simple teachings, teachings of maintain an awareness of the preciousness of human life. Recall that whatever you do has a result, or don't do has a result, teachings of karma. But others are very simple teachings like, this is kind of a little, would have to be unpacked, but drive all blames into one. Kind of a useful reflection, drive all blames into one. I mean, all of the kind of suffering, kind of put it together in as one place to explore. That's how I understand that. And a much more simple teaching would be grateful to everyone. Be grateful to everyone. If we're grateful to everyone, then life is really can be transformed by our gratitude. There's one slogan, these are sometimes called slogans. I think of them as liberating aphorisms, liberating sayings that help us remember. Like I shared the one, allow everything, allow everything. What happens? It's really an exploration. What happens when we allow everything? Really allow whatever comes up in our own experience. Allow it to come, allow it to be. Allow everything in the world, which not necessarily, that doesn't mean we're approving of it, but we're just acknowledging, okay, this is happening right now. Some of the political things we might not like happening, we say, okay, this is happening. And then from that place of allowance, then we can work to make change. But if we step over that allowing, jump over it, if we bypass that allowing, then we will tend to be pulled along by whatever we're caught up in our mind with. We won't be present for our experience. So one of these slogans is, in all activities, train with slogans. Train with these aphorisms, use these aphorisms. A couple of other ones. All Dharma agrees at one point. All Dharma agrees at one point. And that, I think, is essentially that all the teachings are about letting go, about letting go of craving. Another one is work with the greatest defilements first. And that's a kind of an encouragement that rather than, working with the smaller things, you work with the greatest, with the most challenging things first. There may be times when it makes more sense to get small victories and then to move towards larger ones. But that's one of the encouragements in training the mind. Work with the greatest defilements first. Another is always meditate on what provokes resentment. Always meditate on what provokes resentment. So if anything challenges you and causes you to get stuck, that's a place to pay attention, to meditate on. So that's a little bit of a background on these Lojong practices. Traditionally, there's 59 of them going back over 800 years. But I want to just flag a couple that I've developed that work for me, in this recent period. One of them is this allow everything. And that's very much in line with, the ones that, I talk about quite often. Radical acceptance is really allowing everything, deep-rooted acceptance of our experience. Saying yes to what is, Eckhart Tolle's kind of instruction, is also allowing everything. Welcoming the guests, as Rumi says. That one I like from Anthony de Mello, absolute cooperation with the inevitable, is another way of saying this. But they're kind of all, in some ways, all ways of saying the same thing. Allow everything is the one I'm focusing on right now. Another for me is approach everything from curiosity. approach everything from curiosity. There's lots of ways that's expressed through beginner's mind. Don't know mind is another way of saying that. But approach everything from curiosity is, rather than seeing things as the problem, oh, that shouldn't be happening. Why are they doing that? They're so mean. They're so, nasty, whatever. Rather than that, can I meet that whatever is happening with curiosity? Can I just, okay, can I be curious? Can I investigate? And then what happens is everything changes. If I meet things with resistance, there's going to be resistance, there's going to be suffering. If I meet things with curiosity, then there's a space for change, for opening, for creativity. So that's the second one, approach everything from curiosity. A third one is be aware of the difference or distinguish between being aware of and being swept up in. Distinguish, that's one I spoke about before. Distinguish between being aware of and being swept up in. When we're caught up in anger, how different it is from being aware of being caught up in anger. That again, all of these are kind of, I see as liberating aphorism, liberating things to remember. And I think we can develop our own, just ways that we kind of remind ourselves, allow everything. Another is slow time down, slow time down. This is a big one for me right now. I just realize how, I'm not just realized, but I realized kind of more deeply how important it is to slow down time. Because all of the things I was talking about of how we are swept up in the world through all the things we're doing and all the things the world is saying, do this, look at this, buy me, all of that is all about, it's like, it's in some way, we're caught up in time, do it now, be here, look at me now. And what we need to do to help ourselves is to slow down time, to pause, to breathe. Essentially what we're doing here today in many ways is slowing down time, particularly in meditation. We're saying, okay, the mind may be racing, but can I just notice that? And the more I notice it, the more the tendency of the mind to race will itself slow down, so that the slowing down of time makes the space for us to make change, allows the space to make change. So, it's what Viktor Frankl said, between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space lies our ability to choose. And in our ability to choose lies our growth and our freedom. If we can find that space, Martha Postlethwaite's clearing, if I could find that space between stimulus and response, then I can choose. And if I can choose, then I can choose a more healthier, more beneficial response and not choose the more harmful one. And that's the path to growth and freedom. So slow down time, slow time down. So those are some aphorisms, some Lojong, some modern versions of Lojong. Another one, which kind of is a doorway in, a very simple one, is love everyone. Love everyone. We might at first think, shoot, that's too much. You mean this person too? But yes, that's the challenge. Love everyone. Can I love everyone? Can I love even those who I don't want to? I feel like I don't want them. I don't want to have anything to do with them. No mind loving them. Can that be? Can I love that person? They don't have to be my best friend, but can I include them in my caring, my loving kindness for them and for all beings? So I'm going to pause here. I'm going to invite you to reflect on those, take those in. I'll share those, the particular ones I shared, in case you missed them in the chat or somebody else can put them in. I do want Emily to lead us in some movement, and then as soon as we come back, I'm going to come to Bob, who's raised his hand, and anyone else who'd like to raise their hand. Would it be okay to do it after Emily, Bob? Yeah, okay, great. So Emily, if you would lead us into the movement, that'd be lovely. Thank you.
Let me invite you to stand up or work from your place of comfort and just open up in the space surrounding your own body with your arms, creating a sense of how you can open in this area. And then open your arms wide to embrace your being and raise your arms up. Reaching up, exhale, soften your shoulders, soften your elbows. And then grasp your left wrist in your right hand. Extend out towards the right and tilt. Tilting, breathing into that left rib cage. You don't have to work to your ultimate point, just be. And then inhale up, switch rests, extending out to the left, expanding that right rib cage as you breathe in. And exhale, soften here, allowing. And then come back to center, float your arms down and roll your shoulders together. And roll them the other way. And then bring your arms up, elbows bent, fingertips pointed to the ceiling. And on an exhale, drop your hands down, leaving the elbows up. Inhale, rise. Exhale, float down. Inhale, rise up. Exhale, float. Extend out, reaching out, and then turn your left palm up, the right palm down. And switch. So your right palm is up and your left twisted down. And switch. And switch. Last time to the left. And to the right, float your arms down and roll your shoulders individually. And roll them the other way. Come to center. Bring your hands behind your waist, clasping them, and then inhale, lift your head, draw your chest up. Exhale, expand your arms down, drawing your shoulder blades together. And then back to your waist, drop your head, your chin to your chest. Inhale, lifting your head, bringing your chest up. Exhale, drawing the arms down, engaging the shoulder blades. And back to the waist. Float your arms up and just for a moment, wave in your own space, expanding. And then to a forward bend, bring your hands above your knees, expanding out to a flat back. And then drop down, allowing your head and your shoulders to feel as they drop down, the pull of gravity. Just allow your breath to be part of this movement. Breathing in and exhaling, softening into a new space. And then draw your hands back above your knees and roll up your spine, stacking the vertebrae, drawing your shoulders up around your ears and soften them with the exhale. Bring your hands above your head in prayer position and create that center line, drawing down to the heart space, thumbs at the sternum, and take a bow. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you as always, Emily. Lovely. Thank you. And please, Bob, if you would like to share, and then anyone else, please. Oh, Bob didn't mean to raise his hand. Sometimes my Zoom picks up movements and mistranslates them, even having me thumbs up when I'm. No problem, Bob. But feel free if you do have anything to share it. Great, thanks. Bye, Arv, if you haven't left already. Great to see you, and yeah, would invite anyone to share if you have any questions or anything you'd like to share. It doesn't have to be a question, but just how are you doing? And please feel free to share anything in the chat, in the comments that came up for you, in relation to any of the meditation or the reflection on from Dr. King, or from the talk today, or from the movement. And yeah, lovely. Thank you. Yeah, I very much hear you, what you shared there. It's definitely on my mind. Terry and Gabriella.
Francine and Henry
shared
have
earlier.
their hand up.
Sorry, Pat.
I just noticed Francine and Henry, and also Diane have their hands up.
Very good. Francine, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I made a decision to retire from my federal job after 46 years in April. And I am having the most astounding amount of panic. And I go through various levels of it. So, yeah, like first I went through this whole, oh my God, about money, but that's not really the issue. Okay. And there's this, I'm gripped by it. So I feel a little calmer than I did earlier in the morning, but this is really big. And so, I have this one part of me that wants to go, okay, I'm just not going to do it. But I don't know that that's actually the answer to this panic. And I just was wondering what ideas you might have of dealing with this.
Yeah, thank you, Francine. I mean, the first thing I would say is just to kind of acknowledge that that can be, probably all of us have experienced at different levels how painful that can be. So I don't know exactly what you're going through, but I know of which you speak, definitely, and how painful, how difficult that can be. I'm sure many others do as well. And just hearing that, just holding that you with compassion and loving kindness. The first thing I would ask is, do you have somebody, a professional, a therapist, or somebody that you see around this? I asked that first because that, and there's many therapists I know in our community, but that can be, I'm going to talk about the way we work with it through the Dharma practices, but also to acknowledge sometimes professional help can be enormously helpful, enormously valuable, and sometimes really, to be honest, completely necessary. You know, particularly, it's a huge area. So I want to be as agile as I can about what I share. I think these. So that's one point over there to consider. Maybe not necessarily to talk about right now, but to consider if you haven't considered it. What I would say from a Dharma standpoint, from a teachings practice standpoint, these practices, these teachings, I have found enormously helpful, and they can be, they can be life-changing in this area, in the area of anxiety, worry, fear, those conditions, because essentially the way I see those anxiety, worry, is as they're habits of mind. They're largely habits of mind. There may be some other elements there, but to a very large extent, they're habits of mind. We worry because we've worried before. We've created something in our mind that this is fearful. There's something here to be vigilant about, to worry about. And again, I'm not saying this is absolutely everything, but it is for me, a very, very large part of it. And the more that we can develop the practice of, essentially what I've been talking about today, of being present, this compassionate awareness, of noticing when the mind goes off into fear and worry, and pausing, saying, okay, that part of you, bow to that part of you, that part of your being or consciousness that's worried, that's caught up in fear. Thank you for that, for trying to take care of me. But see, I don't need that right now. I can let that go and I can just open. Now, what am I noticing? I'm noticing tension in my belly, in my chest. I'm noticing tightness in my muscles. I'm noticing I'm in a fight or flight place. And as I notice that, I can let myself perhaps relax a little bit more. Maybe the thoughts come again, and I notice that. Thank you, with kindness, come back again, and just keep coming back to what's present, because the story in the mind is about the future. It's not about what's happening here. If you're dealing with just what's happening here, you're dealing with exactly what I'm talking about. Can I be with my bodily feelings? Can I notice the heat, the tightness, the tension, whatever? Can I let it come, let it go? The more I can learn to tolerate, one term that's used is, the more I can expand my window of tolerance to be with my own direct experience, the more I can, or the less I'm going to be caught up in those mind stories about what might happen, what will happen, what could happen, etc. So that's the essence of what the Dharma these teachings help us to do, to kind of untangle ourselves. It's that Lojong that I distinguish between being aware of and being caught up in. What you're talking about, and what many of us are very familiar with, is we're caught up in that. We're caught up in the fear, the worry. And what we're wanting to do is to bring ourselves back to awareness of, out of, pulled in, swept up in, etc. One other thing I would say is, in order to do that, sometimes the fear can be so strong that we don't feel like we have the resources just to be aware of it. We come to the body and say, yes, but, and the mind goes, no, this, fear. Then it can be difficult. That's when sometimes we might need professional help to find ways, it could be cognitive behavioral therapy or other approaches that can be helpful. All of these are really good. And the thing I'm focusing on is from the Dharma side of it, is the more we can strengthen our capacity of awareness, compassionate awareness, through training, through practice, the more we build up the resources so that when we do get caught up in even a panic attack, a strong fear, that we have the resources. What Rob Burbea, who I kind of see as a teacher, speaks about as the inner reservoir of well-being, an inner reservoir of well-being that will give me the strength to be able to meet with all those fears and those worries when they come up. And that, I know there's much more to be said, and that's already is a lot, but I would encourage you in those two directions. One, exactly what I've been talking about today, in terms of creating the space to be able to hold what is underneath that fear. And then, if necessary, where appropriate, look for other forms of support too, particularly if it feels really intense. I hope that's useful, Francine, and you could feel free to follow up with me afterwards if you want to clarify anything or add anything. I think you probably have my email. I'll put that in for you and for others as well. So thank you for sharing that. And I just want to make sure that get to hear from Diane and Christine before we go into announcements. But thank you, Francine.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Diane, sorry.
Hi, grateful to be here this morning. And I think you read from Martin Luther King's speech last year too. And I remember being moved by it then. So thank you again for that. And I just have more of a observation about myself from the meditation, and what's lingering with me is 1968 I was 12. And that was a momentous year in the country's history, but also, with Martin Luther King's assassination in April and then Robert Kennedy in June. And my father died suddenly in October of that year. So it's just what came up for me was just the grief around that was there at that time. And how tumultuous times it was in a way. And I've lived in North Carolina most of my life, and remember Charlotte with desegregation, and anyhow. And I worked with underserved communities in mental health in my professional life. And I just was feeling a lot of grief of how difficult things were then and how difficult they still are. And it's taps into my grief and care and compassion and wishing for things to be other than they are. And it's sort of just trying to accept reality and figure out what's for me to do in all of that, because it's much bigger than any one person.
Yeah.
So thanks for listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Diane. I think you spoke beautifully, and I think you probably spoke for a lot of people. I've talked here at different times about what I use the term, and others use the term, unmourned grief. The grief that we hold inside ourselves that hasn't had a chance to be processed. And I think you spoke beautifully to how it kind of manifests in you, and I would encourage you and encourage all of us just to honor that grief. Grief calls for attention, for respect, for honor, for time, all of those, and to be really kind to yourself, to ourselves, when it comes up. I mean, it's in fact, I think grief, grief properly processed or skillfully processed is a very, very beautiful emotion. I think of, I connect with my mother a lot, who died 3 years ago, and it's always, there's tears, but it has this beautiful joy and gratitude and love in there as well. And often grief can do that. Grief also can have, much more painful and difficult things to it as well. But if we can allow it to come and go. And in relation to what Francine shared as well, some Bob and others in the chat were talking about the importance of compassion and rain meditation. I just want to really, not add to that, but just really say yes to that. That's really, really key. Kindness to ourselves with all that's coming up. I mean, these are incredibly challenging times we're living in. I can't believe that for anybody they're easy street, just to, la-di-da. Well, maybe. I mean, they could be if we're just kind of living, if we're kind of living off the grid or not too concerned about what's going on. But it just feels there's a lot of suffering and a lot that feels at stake, particularly when you think of, racial justice, social justice in the country, in the world, climate change. A lot is hanging on it. It really does make a difference. And so how to hold that all of that in ways that are, as T.S. Eliot said, teach us to care and not to care, where we care deeply, but not in a way where it turns into clinging, into afflictive emotion that then becomes counterproductive and actually leads to suffering. Can we keep our hearts open so that we care deeply? So thank you so much for sharing that, Diane. I think you shared what is in a lot of people's hearts, a lot of our hearts. Thank you. We'll finish with Christine, and then we'll have some announcements.
Thank you, Hugh. Mine is pretty much a segue from what Diane said about the racial things going on in this country, which are overwhelming, and the unmourned grief helps. But where I get stuck is, what can I do about it that's really going to make a difference? Not just to me, but to people who need to be heard or they need help. And I really get stuck there.
Yeah. And I think what I'm concerned, we don't have time to fully address everything, but what I would say is, when what can I do turns into I have to do it, I have to find a solution. If it takes on that contracted quality, then it's helpful to kind of step back, take some time, notice what I was saying, the difference between aware of and swept up in. I'll just give you an example. I've used this once, maybe I brought this up once or twice before, that when I found myself very caught up in what's going on in the country, particularly around the elections and immediate aftermath of that, and I was involved, as many of you were, actively in engaging as well as I could in the situation, trying to move things in a good direction, or what I saw as a better direction. When I found myself getting kind of caught up in it, like as if I had to find the solution or get the solution. One of the things that came to me was, and it came out as like one of these Lojong statements, like it came out like, it's not yours alone, or it's not mine alone. It was a remembering that I don't have to have the solution on my own, that this is something that we're all holding, whether it's racial justice, whether it's the climate crisis, that it's something we're all holding, and absolutely not to have that as a way of doing nothing, but as a way of just stepping out of the self-focus, which is where the suffering comes. The suffering comes with the self-focus, that I have to find the solution to this. If I don't do this, everything's going to fail, fall apart, whatever. And somehow I've got to hold this. That's a delusion. You know, it's an understandable one, but it's still a delusion. We're not seeing things clearly if we believe that, because the truth is much larger. The truth is we are all holding it. So for me, that kind of aphorism of kind of coming back to, it's not mine alone, gave me the space to be able to hold things and to go back more into action, you know, and engage wisely. Because if I'm in that place, I can't engage wisely because I'm in survival mode. I'm in tunnel vision. I need the space to be able to be able to engage and respond kindly, wisely, well, and all of that. So that's just one. Again, there's a lot more can be said, and I invite folks to share in the chat if they have some additions to that. But that's the thing that I come back to, Christine. And I know, you know, you've been an activist and engaged as many people here have, and it's a challenging time. You know, I was an activist, you know, as a livelihood for, you know, for 20, 25 years, and I can see how, in retrospect, how easy it is to get caught up in, you know, we're doing really necessary things, but to be engaged in a way that actually isn't helpful for myself, for others, or for sentient beings in general. If I'm coming from this tight place, or if I'm coming from, we're right, you're wrong, or we've got to have this happen, we've got to do this, then there's suffering in it. So share that. And I think we're going to have to move this offline. I think we'll have some aftermath sharing, and before that, to finish up, we'll have I'll just share a couple of things and then pass it to Margaret. First, to just thank everyone for your participation today. Although I do a lot of the talking, this is a co-creation. We do it all together, and it's lovely to have the chat and people's inputs. I obviously don't have a lot of time to read it while we're online, but I do save it and read it afterwards. So please feel free to share anything with others and to me as well. So thanks everyone. Just a couple of things. I do want to just flag, I've got a 6-week course coming up on the heart practices, which are really so essential to our practice and for the times we're living in. Loving kindness, compassion, joy, spiritual joy, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. That's going to be beginning on March, I think, 29th, and go for 6 weeks with a bonus week to do questions and things that didn't get finished in the first 6 weeks, optional bonus week. So that's coming up. Margaret, I think, has shared in the chat, and maybe we'll share again upcoming things. I've got a retreat in Ireland. It's filling up. We've got about 6 or 7 spots left. So if you are thinking of going on retreat in beautiful County Mayo in the west of Ireland, that's in mid-June, June 19th, I think, somewhere right in the middle of June. And I'll just mention that there's no charge for the cost for the class. You're invited, if you are able and inclined, to make a donation. Dana, or generosity, is how the teachings have come down through 2,500 years. And it's a practice that we're committed to continuing today.